Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Herman, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at TIR at Memorial Hermann. We're glad you joined us today. We have a special guest and a special program. And before we get on with it, I want to take a break. But before we take a break, I want to ask you a question. Where was Goodwill in Houston located before anybody thought about it? Most of you have gone on to careers, and most of you have forgotten about the history of Goodwill. We'll talk about it. Goodwill Industries. Please stay tuned, and we'll be right back with Focus on Abilities. Thank you for watching Focus on Abilities today. This is a program about people with disabilities, and I'm really happy to have as our guest today the President and CEO of Houston's Goodwill Industries, Steve Lufburrow. Steve, thanks for being our guest today.
Lex, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, most people in Houston, I think, have seen Goodwill. They've heard about Goodwill. Some of us are old enough to remember a young man playing the drum set on TV and talking about Goodwill Industries. I understand you still play the drums.
I still do. You know, even though I'm getting older, you've got to have fun when we grow up, right? And I'm still trying to grow up.
Now, you know, in that regard, you've more or less grown up with Goodwill in Houston, haven't you?
I really have. My father was involved in Goodwill before me, as you know, and I've been around Goodwill since I was 4. And so that gets in your soul and it gets in your blood, and I'm happy that it's still there.
When you started, when you grew up, tagging along with your father, Dr. Bill Lufburrow, who was a mentor of mine and one of my heroes, Steve, I guess he probably took you out to the facilities that they had. You probably spent a lot of time there on Jensen at the campus. And one of the real signatory aspects of that campus that I recall is the water tower.
Yeah, we had 2 actually, and one was a fire tower and the other was drinking water tower. But the greatest part about that location in those days is that was a landmark. People knew exactly where it was on Jensen Drive, which used to be the old north and south before 59 came in. So yeah, I was brought up around there, and it was wonderful being around the environment of Goodwill. It was a smaller company. It was a whole different ball game in those days, but we spent most every weekend down there with my dad while he worked on Saturdays.
Steve, what impressed you the most? I mean, as a child, was it the facilities, the people who worked there, the commitment of your father, or the people who were clients there?
Well, certainly you mentioned Dad was one of your mentors and heroes. Well, he was mine as well. But it was the people. It was the people as a little boy that I had the opportunity to meet who changed my life and showed me at an early age that just because a person has a disability, it doesn't mean they can't do everything that I can do. We just do it differently. And I think that's what turned me on and kept me going forward, and I still feel that way today.
Now, the interesting thing about Goodwill in those days, and maybe today too, we'll talk about that in a minute, but as I recall, there were other Goodwills in the country then. In fact, when I went to school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a Goodwill there, and as a student, one of my faculty asked me to do a paper on the Goodwill, and I went out there and I saw a lot of people who needed help, but not many of them appeared to have a disability. Mm-hmm. Most of them spent the day on a telephone selling light bulbs to people in the community, making calls, and I suppose that was important work in the community, but they always advertised that they were helping people with disabilities, and somehow I wondered about that. I wondered if they weren't taking advantage, like other organizations did at the time, of the aura of helping people with disabilities. I guess the worst was the March of Dimes. They raised millions and millions of dollars on a condition that by that time in the 1970s and 1980s had pretty well been wiped out. Now, they went on to do other good things and important things, but Goodwill was different in Houston. When I went to Houston and had the opportunity to meet your father and to go to Goodwill, I thought, here's a place that talks about doing it, and they do it.
Yeah. And Lex, that's what impressed me about Dad, because as a kid growing up, I saw those other Goodwills. And by the way, the Tulsa Goodwill today is awesome. You would be very proud of what's happened in Tulsa. And in Houston, we never did light bulbs. I don't know about light bulbs, but what I remember as a kid is the person that was really at Goodwill in those days was somebody that had served our country as a veteran and had been wounded in action. That's really who I remember as a kid. And then we started seeing more spinal cord injuries, and then we started seeing a lot of head injuries that really our country had never dealt with at that point in the 60s and the 70s. And people were now living because of medicine. And they needed something to do, and they needed a place to get their confidence to go forward.
Well, the other thing I remember about it is that many of the people who were coming to Goodwill then, maybe again the case now, were indigent. They had a disability. Because of their disability, they couldn't get a job. They were undereducated, generally speaking. They didn't have good support systems in the community. Their families weren't able to help them very much. And there were very few organizations, social service or otherwise, that were willing to take them on and provide any assistance to them. And not only did Goodwill take them on and try to provide them with counseling, but they also offered them the opportunity to earn some dollars, to gain some income, and therefore gain some independence in the process of their training activities.
Yeah, I think Dad made that happen with Goodwill in Houston and put it on the map. You know, before Dad came here in 1964, Goodwill had been around in Houston since 1945. And so as a result of that, Goodwill really wasn't known. And what Dad did in a unique time in our community, it was still small. Houston was a lot smaller. And he, like you said, he walked the talk. He did what he was supposed to be doing. And that's what was so great about it. He was able to raise money, build facilities, and provide job opportunities for a lot of people. And look what happened today. Today, on that foundation, we've been able to grow and do so much more.
Well, the other thing that I liked, too, was that many of those people weren't able to go to a clinic to get help. They weren't able to go to a dentist because they couldn't find one that would treat them without paying. And Goodwill actually had dental facilities, and not only were they providing assistance to the people who needed it, they were training people to work in the field.
You bet. It was, Dad was so far ahead of his time, and people laughed at him, frankly, because, these guys that are out, these trailblazers, people don't quite understand. But then people catch up quickly when they see how well somebody is served and how great things can happen in their lives when you just put some smarts to a problem and you try to fix it. Dad was really good at that.
Now, with all that inspiration and all that leadership and with all that mentorship, did you ever expect to inherit the legacy of Bill Lufburrow?
No. Why would I want to? I mean, you think about, Dad was bigger than life in those days. He had a big name in the community because of the public service announcements. He'd been around the community a long time. And I think when I was in junior high, I started saying, I want to do this for a living. My brother and sister, they didn't want anything to do with it. High school, I was still saying it. I drove trucks in high school and did home pickups and box pickups and all those things, worked on the docks. And then when I got into college, I kept saying, I still want to get into Goodwill. And so I had no clue I was going to end up taking Goodwill over. And I went in college and became an executive trainee for Goodwill Industries International and learned how to become an exec while I worked in Houston under my dad, because we had a large Goodwill at that time. When I was 27, he dropped dead. And I was a trained Goodwill exec, but I was 27. My kids are older than 27. And I look back on those times, and it really was a time of put up or shut up, do your job well, and rely on the things that you were taught that you don't even know you know.
Well, let's talk about what Steve Lufburrow has brought to Houston Goodwill. I want to do that, Steve, but first I'd like to take a break. Thank you all for watching. We'll be right back with more Focus on Abilities. Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, and I'm here today with Steve Lufburrow, who's the president and CEO of Goodwill Industries of Houston. I probably should mention that we are broadcasting today from the Goodwill campus here, and we can ask Steve about how we got to be in this part of town as opposed to the old Jensen Drive facility that some of you may remember. And it also gives me the opportunity, Steve, to answer that question we asked at the beginning of the show. Now, in my memory, I mean, from the time I moved here and I was about 20 years old, Goodwill was always on Jensen Drive before, I guess, the 2001 flood was the real...
That was the reason why we chose to leave, yeah.
But before you were on Jensen, I understand Goodwill was located someplace more centrally located.
Yeah, the property where the Alley Theater is in downtown, that was where Goodwill used to be.
Wow.
And there was a whole lot of, I guess, city politics that went on, and I think Houston Endowment was involved. They wanted to build the alley, and so they found us a property on Jensen and helped us move, and that was before our time. But that's a great legacy and great history.
Well, that's one of those deals you can't refuse, you know. They come to you, they say, well, you better take it or leave it.
I don't
right?
think there was a choice.
Yeah. Well, you know, I suppose you can say that all things being said, it worked out pretty well for Goodwill because you're a thriving organization now.
Yes.
And one of the, I know one of the most difficult challenges for you was the Tropical Storm Allison in 2001. My home was flooded. I lost my home as a result of that. At the same time, I was concerned about others in the community, and Goodwill was certainly threatened by that flood.
Yeah, it was just the strangest thing. If you remember, that storm came in and then it went back out and sat in the Gulf, and then it came back in over kind of the northern side of town. And not only did we lose our main campus, but we lost a lot of our stores for months, because anybody that's been through a flood knows that it just devastates every room, everything you have. And on Jensen, we were 4 feet of water. And so if you put 4 feet of water in a home or an office, it's everything. It's your computers, it's your electrical system, it's your files. And so it really set us back. We had 22 acres on Jensen Drive, and we were in a process of change. Our business model was changing at that point. And we were trying to decide, do we leave Jensen? Do we need all this space? Do we decentralize versus centralize our operations? And about that time, the flood came, but it put us in a spiral of hurt. I mean, it really was a bad time for Goodwill Houston, and we were able to pull that out eventually.
Well, typically not-for-profit organizations don't run with a lot of money in the bank for unseen disasters.
That's correct.
And Goodwill probably was the same way, and then you have that disaster occur. It's difficult to rebuild, and certainly difficult to rebuild quickly. How did you do it?
Well, you know, everybody has insurance, and that's good. You got to have insurance, but there's still a lot of things that aren't covered by insurance. And so what we did is we just rallied together with an incredible board of directors and employee group. We cleaned that place up. We stripped it. We brought in volunteers. We had sheetrock taken out. We brought in drying companies. We got this thing fixed pretty quickly. We met with the insurance people. We were able to build that property back in about 4 months.
Wow.
But we quickly realized this is probably not where we need to be anymore. It wasn't working for us. Along with that, on Jensen and that particular location, we were running into a lot of issues at night. We had a lot of theft and a lot of break-ins, and it was time for us to make a clean change. And so we decided to put the property up for sale. It took us 3 years to sell it, but we did sell it in 2005, and we moved out to Hammerley and the Beltway as a temporary fix as we tried to get the company strong again. And finally, after a 6-year journey, we ended up where we are right at 610 near I-10. Visible, it was always one of my dreams. I wanted people to know where Goodwill was. We aren't a secret, but I also want them to see that we're a professional organization, and we have 90 facilities throughout the city.
Well, I think that's important for people to recognize. When I've been here before, it's interesting to me that this does not look like a training facility. It doesn't look like a school. It doesn't look like an industrial center where you're reviewing what donations people have made. None of that is here. This is a business office where things get done. I've also been impressed that despite the fact it's so-called business office, many of the employees here happen to have people, be people with disabilities. They happen to have challenges themselves. So again, like your father, you seem to be talking the talk and walking the walk. But you have 95 facilities that really constitute Goodwill Industries. Where are they? What are they?
Well, it's a lot of things. It's stores, it's donation centers, and it's job connection centers. So what we did when we decentralized our operation is I said, I'm tired of making people come all the way to Jensen Drive for services. Why don't we take our services out to the community? The people that we're working with already, depending on, no matter what their issue is, they're already struggling with child care, transportation issues, housing. So let's go into their communities. And that's what we did with our job connection centers, and it's been a huge success. We try to keep them on bus lines so that people can get on a bus, come right to our center, and hopefully get connected to a job.
Now, the Job Connection Centers, I presume, then have counselors, people who are trained to help folks maximize their skills, make up their deficits, and find occupations that they can work in.
Exactly. Every job connection has two large classrooms. One is a computer room where we can connect people with an address so they can go help get a job. You've got to be able to get into the technology in this day and age in order to find a job. Our folks are helping with that, to direct a person to help. We have employers standing by to hire people with disabilities, and we love that. And it takes a while to cultivate those groups. And that's kind of what a job connection is, and we've got a great staff at every one of our locations.
Let's talk more about that. I want to thank all of you for watching Focus on Abilities today. Time just flies by when you're looking at a subject like this, and we're going to take a quick break, but we've still got Steve Lufburrow, and we still got a lot to talk about, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. Our guest today is Steve Lufburrow from Goodwill Industries. And Steve, Goodwill provides assistance to people who need job training. They need jobs. And you have these community-based centers that do that. What distinguishes those centers from the donation centers that I've seen in some of the strip malls around town?
Well, we have donation centers and stores, and then the Job Connection Center. And a Job Connection Center is where you go to get help to find a job, applying for a job or training to get a job, learn how to get a job in many cases. A store is exactly what it is. People donate items at the donation centers. That helps create jobs in the store system and then provides the income. We're an economic engine within Goodwill. We're different than a lot of not-for-profits. A lot just have their hands out, which we understand. I've been there and I do it. I'm a fundraiser as well. But we have an economic engine, and we're taking advantage of that in a positive way because of the generosity of the community that support Goodwill to create jobs so that the profits can take care of the facilities, the wages, salaries, and then anything left after that helps support those other programs. And man, we can create all kinds of great programs to help people.
I know a lot of people who buy things at the stores. Mm-hmm. I also know people who say, well, that's just somebody else's lost items or things that don't fit or things that are worn out. What process occurs between the point of time somebody donates something and the time they show up in the stores?
Well, the most important part is you're going for quality. So our employees are taught to go for quality. And it's amazing when you put your donation centers in some of the areas that we're in, the quality's large. But what we'll do is we'll separate those items, hard goods, soft goods, and then we'll price accordingly or reject accordingly. We're also one of the largest producers of salvage, of what they call rags in the business, of items that can't be sold, that are cut up into wiping cloths for industry or sold to third world countries and other places. So that is also a revenue stream, and we're a recycler. We've been recycling materials and individuals, if you think about it, for some of the folks that have come through our doors over the years. We've been making great things out of things that the community has labeled, not all that great.
So I presume you would encourage people who are watching the show, if they're interested in job training, if they need some help finding an employer who's looking for them, mm-hmm. to go to your facilities. If they have something they feel has some remaining value to somebody else, they should donate it at one of the donation centers. And if they need to find a quality product at a really good price, they should visit a Goodwill store.
That's the best commercial I could ever do. Thank you, Lex. That was perfect.
So Steve, tell us, if somebody, it's confusing a little bit because drive around town, you see Goodwill signs in many, many strip malls and shopping centers. How do we know the difference between the ones where we're going in to get a job and the ones where we want to make a donation and those that are stores?
It is confusing. because we have so many different business pieces, but we've tried to make it very simple. We just label them. This is a donation center. This is a select store. This is a job connection center. We want all of them to be in one place. A donation center, a store, and a job connection.
Oh, okay.
And so we're retraining the public's mind, and we're doing that. We have 6 of those now, and we will have more as we go forward. And we have 48 stores total, but we don't have them all as job connections. So we still got those around the community. Our website's the best place to find those.
Okay, and what's that
It's
URL?
goodwillhouston.org, O-R-G.
Okay, and you can go there and find a map, I suppose,
Find a map
leading
and
you.
directions,
All right.
everything.
And probably also information about how to sort your things if you want to help Goodwill before you,
bet.
deliver
What
them
we
and
need.
so forth.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool. Steve, the future of Goodwill, how do you see that now? The economy's changing, the job sectors are changing. Used to be you could teach people to do industrial jobs, they could find work. Nowadays, that's not necessarily the case. How's Goodwill changing?
Well, Goodwill's changing because we're trying to adapt to our world and adopt to a new set of how do you get a job, what kind of jobs are out there. The person that I saw in the 60s when I was a kid, they're not at Goodwill anymore. And that's a good thing in many cases because they're at other locations. Other organizations have opportunities where in those days there weren't a lot of opportunities out there. So one of the things that we're focusing in on, there is a huge need for things like autism and issues that are coming forward in our community that we didn't even talk about 30 years ago. And so what we're trying to do is work with the tiers and work with the hospital systems and try to be the answer, the solution, a positive solution to get a person a start. Not necessarily a career, although if they stay, wonderful, but a start so they can get their foot in the door to have a gainful employment job, when they're finished.
You have any data on the outcomes that you have as a result of the work you do?
Yeah, we like to say we're 100% successful, but with the population that we work with, which is veterans, it's homeless. I mean, it's a lot of people that we deal with, plus people with physical, mental, emotional type disabilities. We work with people with barriers. So we're not always successful, but I'll tell you what, we do everything we can to give a person an opportunity. And what's so cool about Goodwill in my mind is when somebody fails, we give them a chance again. We continue to work with them until they make it. We were at a function just a little while ago at Goodwill where a lady came up and she said, I was at Goodwill school 20 years ago. And she goes, look at me today. And now she's working for one of our city council members. I mean, those things excite me and keep me going forward.
What can the public do to support Goodwill going forward?
Well, I think it's always important to be aware that we always need good volunteers. We want you to shop with us. We want you to donate. We want you to donate in a smart way. It doesn't matter if it's Goodwill, by the way. Just make sure you're making a donation to an organization that really is using it for what they say they're using it for. So I think our city's big enough for that. But shop in a Goodwill. Come and see what the new Goodwill looks like. I always joke and say it's not my daddy's Goodwill anymore, but I kind of mean that.
Yeah.
It's really not my daddy's Goodwill anymore, but he set the foundation and made it what it is today.
Well, just on behalf of people with disabilities in our community, I think it's important to note that this Goodwill is not necessarily like others. There is a national organization. I've had the opportunity to work together with some of the leaders of that organization on international activities before, but every Goodwill is different. And I would say we should be happy in Houston to have the #1 Goodwill in the country.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that.
Steve, your efforts are only representative of those I know of all your staff and all the people who've been clients here, who've had the opportunity through Goodwill to work here. And I know that your goal for the future is to continue going forward, to build Goodwill, to continue to have it as a resource for people in the community who might not have another resource.
Correct. It is one of the things that we have to work on constantly. And I'm so proud of our staff. Many of our staff are people that came through our programs and in our veterans communities, in our job connection centers. And that's one of the things that thrills me about Goodwill. When most employers, I think, say, well, I have a disability, I don't know. If they say to us, well, I do this, this, and this, and I happen to have a disability, we're like, okay, great. That's a check in the positive for Goodwill. I don't think it's that way in the community, and we're trying to change that.
Steve, thanks a lot for being our guest today on Focus on Abilities. And again, thank you. It's a great program, and I appreciate your personal efforts.
Thank you, Lex.
I want to thank all of you for watching. We'll be right back with one final word from Focus on Abilities. You've been watching Focus on Abilities. It's a program of HTV. It's a community service, and it's one that I'm proud to be associated with. Goodwill Industries has been the subject of today's program. I want to thank Steve Lufburrow for being our guest. I want to thank all of you for watching. My name is Lex Frieden, and I hope you'll join us again next time for more Focus on Abilities.